All right, the Your Season is Over video will be coming out later this afternoon like it always does. I don't know, probably around 5 or 6 is the normal time I get done working on that. But of course, the Your Season is Over video is about losers, mostly, 90% of it, teams that lost, right? And I do a section of teams that won and looked bad, and obviously Georgia will be mentioned in that section. But I had to come on here and just make a separate video about the game yesterday. Georgia at Kentucky escapes with a win, 13-12. It's unacceptable. I've spent half the night last night and half this morning today just with all the excuses that I'm seeing online from different people, mostly Georgia fans, about why this happened and why this and why that. I don't know why, but it's becoming aggravating. But this tired talking point, well, there's a couple of things. This talking point that seems to be out there among some Georgia people that it's hard to play at Kentucky. No, it's not hard to play at Kentucky. It's not hard to win at Kentucky. It's hard for Georgia to play at Kentucky. It's hard for Georgia to win at Kentucky. Why? I don't know. But this idea that playing on the road at Kentucky is some sort of insurmountable feat is just ridiculous. Make a list in your head of the toughest places to play in the SEC and stop when you get to Kentucky. There's 16 teams in the SEC. You're going to get to 13 or 14 teams before Kentucky even crosses your mind. I mean, Georgia, Bama, LSU, Auburn, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and Texas now. Texas A&M, Florida, and the Swamp. South Carolina is a more difficult place to play. Mississippi State, the Cowbells may be a more difficult place to play. You're going to get to 13, 14, 15 before you even start to think about Kentucky. So I'm getting tired of hearing this excuse, really, that it's hard to play at Kentucky. No. For some reason, it's hard for Georgia, in particular, to play at Kentucky. I had another one. Well, they were good in such and such years that Georgia played there. Were they? Are you sure about that? Okay, first of all, Kirby has played at Kentucky 5 times, going back to 2016, his first year at Georgia. He's played there 5 times, 2016, 2018, 2020, 22, and now 2024. Here's Kentucky's records in each of those years. Right now, this year, they're 1-2. They're not a good team. They're not good because Georgia played like shit yesterday. Kentucky's not, I mean, that's ridiculous for Georgia to say, oh, Kentucky's good. No, they're not. They're not good. They're 1-2 right now. The last time we played them in 2022, they were 7-6. In 2020, they were 5-6. The only year they were good was 2018. They were 10-3 in 2018. And that's the biggest beatdown Georgia put on them in Kirby's tenure in Lexington in 2018. 34 points Georgia scored up there. So in 2016, they were 7-6. So in other words, here's their records the 5 times Kirby has played on the road at Kentucky. 7-6, 10-3, 5-6, 7-6, and then this year 1-2. So no, it's not hard to play at Kentucky. They lose half their home games at least every year. South Carolina just put up 31 on them in Lexington last week. So no, it's not hard to play at Kentucky. No, they're not good every other year when Georgia happens to be playing them there. None of that is true. Here's the points scored by Georgia since Kirby's been head coach on the road at Kentucky. In 2016, 27 points. In 2018, 34 points. Wow, absolute offensive explosion there. 2020, 14 points. 2022, 16 points. Georgia was 15-0 in 2022. Blew out almost everybody they played, including TCU in the national championship. They scored 16 on the road at Kentucky. And then, of course, last night they scored 13. Now, they won all of those games. The defense has played fine. The defense hasn't had any issues on the road at Kentucky. Here's the point totals for Kentucky. Last night, 12. In 2022, they scored 6, Kentucky did. In 2020, they only scored 3. In 2018, the year they went 10-3, the only decent year they've had that Georgia's played there, they only scored 17. And in 2016, they scored 24, but they still lost. That was the year Georgia kicked a game-winning field goal and beat them 27-24. So Kirby's 5-0 on the road at Kentucky, but for whatever reason, the offense is stuck in neutral up there. It's not because Kentucky is a hard place to play. That's not the answer. It's not hard for anybody, literally anybody else to play play there. Nobody. When Tennessee was in the absolute toilet of the college football world and busy winning 4 and 5 games a year, they won at Kentucky every single year without batting an eye. It's not hard to play there. It's not because Kentucky's good every year that we happen to play there. They're not. They've had one winning record. They had a 7-6 season. Other than that, they've had one winning record in 16, 18, 20, 22, and now 24. So no, that's not it. And by my count, Kirby has played on the road at Kentucky with 4 different offensive coordinators. 4. 3 different starting quarterbacks. And 1 head coach. The only common denominator that runs through Georgia from 2016 to now in terms of Georgia struggling on the road at Kentucky is Kirby Smart. I'm not saying it's Kirby Smart's fault we struggle there. I'm saying I don't have a fucking clue. I can't figure it out. I've literally been banging my head against the wall. I couldn't go to bed. I didn't go to sleep till 4:30 last night. I couldn't sleep. Not because Georgia won 13-12, but because yet again Georgia goes up to Kentucky and can't get a fucking first down. They just played terrible. And that's unacceptable. That's just unacceptable. The talent gap between Georgia and Kentucky is mind-boggling. I mean, it's just unreal. Georgia had the least amount of yards they've had in a half of football in like 15 years yesterday against Kentucky in the first. They had 65 yards of offense in the first half. That is unbelievable. There's 4 NFL offensive linemen. There's a couple of possible NFL wide receivers, a couple of possible NFL tight ends, a couple of possible NFL running backs, an NFL quarterback in Carson Beck, and they can't get a first down for the umpteenth year in a row on the road at Kentucky. I can't figure it out. And this is terrible timing for this to happen. I've heard people say, well, good thing we got a bye week. And it's not about the bye week. It's about momentum heading into one of the biggest games of the year. Georgia's got to play on the road at Bama in 2 weeks. Yeah, great. They're off this week. That's amazing. Maybe they'll get some injured players back or some players can rest or whatever. All that is great. I'm not look, every team likes the bye week. I'm not saying that. But the problem, go back to last year. Why did Georgia lose to Bama last year? If you had to pinpoint one thing, it's not Jalen Milroe. He played like shit. Could barely complete a pass. Lines of scrimmage. Georgia got humiliated, dominated, and pushed around on both lines of scrimmage. And you look at that game yesterday, and then you can't help but fast forward in your mind to what those lines of scrimmage are going to look like on the road in Tuscaloosa in 2 weeks, and it's not good. It's not good at all. I picked Georgia to beat Bama in my preseason prediction videos. I didn't pick anybody to go undefeated. I had Georgia losing on the road at Ole Miss, which, have you seen them play, by the way? It's still likely to lose that game, in my opinion. But I don't think they're going to beat Alabama in 2 weeks. The team I saw yesterday, it won't compete with Alabama in 2 weeks. So now, let me clarify something here. I don't think it's very easy in college football. I'm guilty of this too. It's very easy in college football when you're looking at a future matchup down the road, and you go, well, if such and such team plays like they did against such and such, they're going to lose by 30. It's really easy to do that, right? I've done it. We all have done it, right? In other words, what you're saying is, if whatever team plays their worst game of the year against the best team they play, they'll get blown out. Yeah, of course they will. What do you think would happen if Georgia played like they played in the second half against Clemson, and Alabama played like they played in the first half against South Florida? What do you think would happen? Bama would get blown out. Now, that's not going to happen. That's rarely what happens. Rarely can you pick out a team's worst performance of the year and apply that to a big game down the road. So I'm not saying that, it's a guaranteed loss for Georgia coming up in Tuscaloosa because they played bad at Kentucky. Like I mentioned, they played bad at Kentucky in 2022 and went 15-0 and won the national title. So it doesn't mean it can't be done. But to me, it's just from a confidence standpoint. Look, Alabama's the only team in the country that has beat Georgia since COVID, since 2020. So, the whole mental aspect of going into a Georgia-Bama game, Bama's got the advantage there. There's not very many players on Georgia's roster who have beat Alabama. In fact, might not be none. In 2021, I guess Carson Beck was on the team as a backup, but because they didn't play in They didn't play in, well, what year was it they did? Anyway, they lost in the SEC championship one game with them, in 2021, but then beat them in the national title. 2022 they didn't play them because they played LSU in the SEC championship game. But anyway, so like the middle edge goes to Bama. So it just seems like this is a bad time for Georgia to have this type of performance, particularly the lines of scrimmage, which played like complete shit yesterday. The defensive line played okay, but like if you look at Kentucky's rushing totals, they're impressive. Now Georgia didn't allow a touchdown defensively, and that's great, but you got to ask yourself, is that going to be the case against a team as talented as Alabama? No. Alabama's going to score. Georgia hasn't given up a touchdown in 4 straight games, and that's great. I love the defense. It's one of the best 5 defenses in the country, but good defenses get scored on all the time. And was it 2021? The Georgia-Ohio State game. I'm getting my years confused. Anyway, Georgia had one of the best defenses in the country in 2021. Ohio State put up 40 points. I mean, good offenses can score on good defenses. So the defense is not going to go into Tuscaloosa in 2 weeks and pitch a shutout or hold Alabama to a bunch of field goals. It's not going to happen. They're going to score, which means you got to score. Georgia has struggled to get out of the 20s against Alabama every time they've played them in the Kirby Smart era, except the national title game that Georgia won. Other than that, Georgia loses these games 27-24, 27-20, 34-27. There was the 41-24 game. Georgia can't get out of the 20s. And they better make a plan to get out of the 20s against Alabama and Tuscaloosa. But it's not, in other words, it doesn't instill any confidence in me heading into Tuscaloosa. Again, it's not even that Georgia won by 1 point. Forget the 1 point deal. Yes, that's bad. It's humiliating. It's embarrassing. No, Kentucky's not any good. No, I'm not going to come on here and try to convince you that Kentucky's good just because Georgia only beat them by 1. It was a shitty, terrible, unacceptable, piss poor, pathetic, and sad performance by UJ on the road to Lexington yesterday. But it doesn't instill, but for a second, just forget that the fact that it's a 1 point game doesn't matter for this point that I'm about to make here. Georgia could have won that game by 20. If the lines of scrimmage would have performed as poorly as they did, I'd be on here saying the same thing. This is not a good situation heading into a team in Alabama that the sole reason we lost to them last year was line of scrimmage play. And it's hard to see where Georgia has improved, any, on either side of the ball. It's the same defensive lineman as last year, exactly the same. There's a couple of freshmen and sophomores that didn't play last year that, you have now. But like in terms of the 3 or 4 guys they rotate in, it's the same as last year. The offensive line has been unimpressive, really, outside of the second half of the Clemson game. I mean, let's think about it. Georgia's played 6 quarters of football, or 8 quarters of football against Power 5 opponents. They played Clemson and they played Kentucky. In 6 of those quarters, Georgia's offense looked like complete dog shit. They looked like complete dog shit all day yesterday against Kentucky, and it looked like complete shit in the first half against Clemson. It actually looked a lot better in the first half against Clemson, as bad as it was. It was a lot better in the first half against Clemson than it was yesterday against Kentucky. At least against Clemson, Georgia offensively went up and down the field. They get in the red zone in the first half. They committed penalties and ended up having to settle for the 2 field goals. And even at the end of the first half, Georgia hit a big play all the way down to the 10-fucking-yard line. Holding penalty or whatever it was brings it all the way back to midfield, so they get no points out of that drive. So at least they were moving the ball there. They couldn't move the ball yesterday. They couldn't move the ball, and that's concerning. Carson Beck did not – that's the worst game I've ever seen Carson Beck play. Poor throws, missed throws. Really, none of the running backs played well. I didn't think – they played a little bit better later in the game, but like in the first half, it was absolutely abysmal. Again, I put a lot of that on the offensive line. They didn't play well. And, you say what you want. The defense, didn't give up a touchdown, and I agree, that's great. But, if you watch the game, Kentucky had a lot of success running the ball. There were a lot of 4, 5, and 6-yard runs. And if you let Alabama control the line of scrimmage like you let Kentucky control the line of scrimmage, they're not kicking 4 field goals. They're scoring 4 touchdowns or more. So it's not good. And I don't know what, if anything, Georgia can do to get it cleaned up in time to play Alabama. Again, the sky is not falling. These types of games happen. And the odds that Georgia plays its worst game, which they did yesterday, again, on the road in Alabama, is slim to none. I agree with you there. Just like it's extremely unlikely that Alabama plays as bad at home against Georgia in 2 weeks as they did at home against South Florida last week. I mean, I hope as a Georgia fan that version of Alabama shows up in Tuscaloosa. They can't block anybody, can't protect Milroe, can't run the ball. Milroe can't throw. I mean, I hope, but what are the odds of that happening? It's not good. Not good. The most likely scenario when Georgia plays Alabama in 2 weeks is that close to the best possible version of both of those teams show up. The problem is, even if that happens, I don't know if the best possible versions of Georgia along the lines of scrimmage are going to be good enough from what I've seen, not just yesterday, but through the first 3 games of this season to win that game on the road in Tuscaloosa. That's the bad news. The good news is, because we have a 12-team playoff, it's not necessarily the end of the road. However, Georgia's got 4 extremely difficult games this year. 3 of them are on the road, 1 of them's at home. If you lose the first one, which is at Bama, it makes every other one you play that much more stressful and that much more of a kind of must-win game, right? On the road at Texas, on the road at Ole Miss, home against Tennessee. The rest of Georgia's games, at least right now, seem pretty manageable. Florida in the swamp is a dumpster fire. Rumors swirling about a Board of Trustees meeting at Florida today and maybe an announcement tomorrow. I don't know. Mississippi State, we play in Athens. They're obviously horrible. Auburn, we get in Athens. They're not any good. Georgia Tech is a decent team, but Georgia will beat them again. That game's in Athens. So, like, realistically, and look, I know when a team plays bad like Georgia did yesterday, it's fun to come on the internet and say they're going 6-6. But realistically, I picked Georgia to go 11-1 in the offseason. Right now, that seems hard to achieve. Right now, if I would take 10-2 right now. I would take 10-2 right now. Could Georgia go 12-0? They could. They're one of the most talented teams in the country. But being one of the most talented teams in the country and playing like one of the most talented teams in the country when it matters most is not the same thing. And no team plays its best every single week. Alabama didn't look good in the first 3.5 quarters against South Florida. I get all that. But again, I'm not relying on that version of Alabama to show up in 2 weeks. The South Florida version. I'm not relying on that. And I don't think Alabama fans should be relying on yesterday's version of Georgia to show up in Tuscaloosa either. But I am worried about the lines of scrimmage, particularly in the Alabama game. There's an expression people use that, football's about matchups, right? Ole Miss may be a better team than Georgia and Bama. I mean, I don't know. We'll see more football. I'm more worried about the Alabama game than I am the Ole Miss game right now. And that wasn't the case in the offseason, right? Because I picked Georgia to beat Bama and lose to Ole Miss. I think Georgia can handle Ole Miss along the lines of scrimmage. I think. They have improved from last year along the lines of scrimmage. Ole Miss has, through the portal mainly. But I still like Georgia's chances to win the line of scrimmage battle against Ole Miss. So the question with Ole Miss is going to come down to big plays, ability to cover receivers, and slow down their running game, right? But I think Georgia can handle Ole Miss along the lines of scrimmage. With Bama, it's almost the opposite. Ryan Williams has been good for Bama at wide receiver, but I trust Kirby's defense to kind of key on him and limit him a little bit as far as the big plays he makes. The issue is going to be the lines of scrimmage in terms of Alabama running the ball offensively against Georgia, right? That worries me. Look at Brock Vandagriff yesterday. Georgia got pressure on him but couldn't get him down. Jalen Milroe's tougher to get than Brock Vandagriff is a problem. And you look at Georgia with the ball and how they struggled to run it yesterday against Kentucky, and you kind of forward that to Alabama. It doesn't seem good. Again, I agree. You're not likely to see the worst version of Georgia again on the road at Tuscaloosa like you did at Kentucky, just like you're not. I'm saying it over and over again because it's true, but you're not likely to see the Alabama. You're not likely to see the version of Alabama that showed up against South Florida either. But so football is about matchups. So I don't know. Georgia could lose. Maybe Georgia loses this one, beats Ole Miss. Texas is a problem too because Texas has it all. Texas is like a combination of Bama and Ole Miss. They've got the skill position players. They've got the quarterback that can sling it around. They've got good lines of scrimmage like Bama, and they've got the skill players in the offense of Ole Miss. But Texas might be the best team in the SEC. I don't know. It doesn't look like Georgia's the best team in the SEC right now. Honestly, Ole Miss and Tennessee might be the best teams in the SEC right now. I mean, I don't know. We're going to have to see. A game of attrition. I mean, I guess there's positive and negatives no matter which way. Ole Miss and Tennessee have much less depth than teams like Georgia, Bama, and Texas, right? So teams like Tennessee and Ole Miss are much less likely to be able to absorb injuries later in the season than teams like Georgia, Bama, and Texas. You line them up right now, Tennessee or Ole Miss might beat any of those three, Georgia, Bama, or Texas. So I don't know. It's hard to say. It's hard to say. But that was unacceptable by Georgia yesterday. And considering Georgia's track record against Alabama under Kirby Smart, what is Kirby, 1-5 against Bama? All of those games were played against Saban, and so Saban retires. And so Georgia fans have spent the last 8 months asking themselves, is it Saban we can't beat, or is it Bama? A lot of people, myself included, were hoping that it was Saban we couldn't beat. And I do think there's a lot to say for that, too. If you go back and look at a lot of those games, Georgia was winning the majority of those games against Bama at halftime and then lost in the second half. What is that a sign of? It's a sign of getting out-coached. No real shame in getting out-coached by Nick Saban, and Georgia did that multiple times and lost. But, now he's gone. DeBoer is in. And if the first game against Georgia or Georgia's first game against Bama in the post-Saban era is just another Kirby loss to Bama, it's going to be hard to keep leaning on the, Saban has his number crutch that we've been leaning on as Georgia fans. So I don't think it's the end of the world for Georgia. I don't think this means they'll definitely lose to Bama, but I do think this is a bad time for Georgia to have played its worst game, where confidence needs to be high. I think one of Georgia's problems against Bama has been confidence or lack of confidence. And playing this type of a game, I know they're on a bye week, but playing this type of a game, the game before Bama, feels like probably not too good for their confidence. Again, on the positive side, I guess Kirby Smart's going to have plenty to yell at practice for the next 2 weeks to try to motivate and, get the players better or whatever the case. As far as the Mike Bobo hate goes, Todd Monken scored 16 points on Kentucky in 2022, and in 2020 he scored 14. Todd Monken on the road in Lexington, 14 points in 20, 16 points in 22. 13 points yesterday by Bobo. The people that just look, you got to understand. There's some of these Georgia fans that they tweet out "fire Bobo" every time Carson Beck throws an incomplete pass. Carson Beck fumbles a snap yesterday, and they're tweeting "fire Bobo." I don't think there's anything wrong with Bobo as an OC. Yesterday was pretty bad. It seemed vanilla, and more than anything else, it seemed very uncreative yesterday. But here's the thing with me. I call it like I see it from a week-to-week basis. I don't blindly say Bobo is great and can do no wrong, and I don't blindly say Bobo's retarded, doesn't know what he's doing, and should have been fired yesterday every time Georgia commits a false start, which is what a lot of these people do. Bobo, for the most part, last season and this season, has done a tremendous job as offensive coordinator. Georgia had a top 5 offense last year. Top 5 scoring, top 5 total offense. Carson Beck was a top 5 quarterback. Just across the board, it was a success for Mike Bobo. The Bobo haters point at the Bama game. He only scored 24 points. Well, how many points did Todd Monken score against Bama in the only SEC championship game Todd Monken coached against Bama? 24. Exactly the same. So again, it's it's a little easy and lazy, in my opinion, I guess, to blame Bobo. I do think it was a poorly called game yesterday. And I'm a I guess a Bobo fan wouldn't be the right word, but I've been supportive of Bobo. I think he's done a good job as OC. Yesterday was not good across the board offensively. I thought play calling was bad, the creativity was bad, lack of explosive plays, the lines of scrimmage were bad, the running backs didn't look good. Carson Beck had probably his worst game as a starter. So just not good. But anyway, I wanted to come on and talk about the Georgia thing because I won't talk about it much in the Your Season Is Over video because we talk about teams that lost, and luckily Georgia escaped with a 1-point win, so there won't be a lot of time in the Your Season Is Over video to talk about that. Haven't moved any of the helmets over to the Your Season Is Over wall yet, but this one is staying over here permanently. I don't even care if they win a game. I'm just not moving the Florida State helmet off of the Your Season Is Over wall for the rest of the year. They're the worst Power 4 team on the planet, so look on the bright side, Georgia fans. It could be worse. You could be an FSU fan.